There was one test.
Where are all y'all? Fantastic. All right.
One test, so half point to see if I can fix it.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, how you doing, buddy?
Sorry I'm late.
No, you're fine. Everybody, Bert Tanner, enjoy. Thank you.
So, do we have like a full hour, or do we do whatever works for people in the talk, or we're flexible?
Yeah, I mean, we got it till like, I think 1.
Okay, sounds good. We can do whatever.
All right.
All right. Welcome to Pullman. You guys have been here about a month now?
Yes.
How's it going?
Good.
Pretty good. There's some head nods. Are you all from different disciplines? From, like, who knows, engineering to earth science to, what else is there? Plant pathology. You like that? Cool. And are you all from all over the country? Sweet. Well, thanks for coming for your summer here. I hope you're learning a lot, having some fun. So, I'm happy to answer any of your questions. As a little bit of background, I basically study cardiac and skeletal muscle contraction, but my background is in physics and bioengineering. So, I did my undergrad in physics at University of Utah and my PhD in bioengineering at University of Washington. So a lot of times people think that you always have to get a master's degree on your way to getting your PhD, and that's sort of discipline specific. I don't know if you guys know that or not. Some disciplines you do, some disciplines you don't. In a lot of the life sciences, there's less masters than there are just going straight to a PhD. A lot of that happens to be because it takes a long time to have biology work properly, whereas if you're doing computer science or engineering projects, things like that, you can have like really focused specific things that you maybe can get done in 1.5 or 2 years. In general, in biology and life sciences and bioengineering or biomedical fields, it's sort of hard to really do anything meaningful in 1.5 or 2 years, just because there's a lot to learn across a lot of different levels. So that's why I just went straight away and got my PhD. Another good thing to know, because you guys are all here associated with the sciences, I know there's a lot of people who are interested in maybe going to medical school or maybe going to grad school or whatnot. But typically, when you're in the sciences and you go to grad school, most of the time you don't have to pay for it. Usually you get paid to go to grad school with a stipend. And sometimes that's paid through the university. Sometimes there's other grants you can apply for it. Sometimes it's paid through your lab. But for the most part, if some of you guys are thinking that grad school is too expensive or it's not a good direction, most people don't have to pay to go to grad school in the sciences. And if you go for a PhD, that's even more true, because then you're going to be there for longer. So the lab and the university are willing to give more support to make it so you can do a bigger project to incentivize doing your PhD in a project rather than just a master's. So those are a couple little details. Does anybody talk to you about that previously? So sometimes yes, sometimes no. So those are some things that are big questions. I don't know how much all y'all know about muscle, but we work a lot with actin and myosin. Those are the contractile proteins. Myosin's a motor protein. It uses ATP, the energy from hydrolysis of ATP, to produce work and force. That's what leads to your muscles contracting as millions and millions of little motors pulling the fibers shorter. And we're interested in how that process works energetically, and also how that process leads from the chemical energy to the mechanical work production, and how that changes with like a few motors versus millions of motors that actually make a muscle. And then because a lot of how it's regulated, how that occurs, not very well understood. And moreover, a lot of diseases that are related to contractile deficits, related to heart disease and musculoskeletal diseases. There's basically three versions. In the heart, there's problems with the plumbing, there's problems with the mechanics, and there's problems with the electrical. So you have like some depolarization problems, so that's an arrhythmia or an electrical problem, or you don't pump very well, or you've got a vasculature problem, or you have a heart attack or something like that. In the skeletal muscle, it's basically, it can be the same three things, but usually skeletal muscle disorders aren't really related to changes in vascular function. Like if your heart vasculature starts to clog up, it'll lead to a heart attack. It's not really the same way in your skeletal muscles as much. I mean, you can have paralysis and things like that, but it's not as detrimental. So the neuromuscular side, you either have problems with how the nerves tell the muscles to contract or how the muscle contracts. But we basically work downstream from the nervous system to look at how the machinery works and how it's regulated with actin and myosin to produce force. And all of that is generally associated with disease and dysfunction related to locomotion or poor blood pumping. So before I was here, I spent 4 or 5 years as a postdoc at University of Vermont. And then I've been here for about 6 years getting my lab started up. So that's sort of my background. Do you guys have any questions related to science or any of the science we do or any of the science that you do? Or do you have any other questions related to graduate school or anything that I could help answer about? We've gone on now for about 7 minutes, which is going to mean long afternoon, or we can leave early if you don't have anything to say, but I'm happy. They told me not to make a presentation about my research. I don't know what other people have been doing, but I could talk to you more about that. I can draw on the board, or we can just discuss what your career goals are. Yes?
What caused you to shift over and look at like muscle contraction, because you like focused mainly on physics and engineering?
So, to clarify the component in the bioengineering and biomedical side of things, I'm much more on like the mathematics and physics and mechanical engineering side of how muscle works. I don't do a lot of biochemistry. It's more on things that are associated with computational modeling to predict dysfunction as well. So I kind of left that out. We have 2 sides of the lab where we do experiments and another side that does a lot of theory work. But what happened was, is I hadn't ever studied very much biology in my life. And when I had graduated college, right before I finished, I hurt my knee. And as part of what was going on with trying to get better with my knee, I started like reading about how do ligaments work, how do muscles work, what's going on with like a rehabilitation or a cell healing process. And I just started to study a little bit of biology. And I was just really struck with how little people know about how things actually work and how different proteins of different steps work together. I mean, there's a lot that we know, but how it actually works and the dynamics behind it from like a mathematical perspective of like multi-scale systems is wide open territory. I mean, a lot of people are working on it, but there's so much information that we don't know that is important to try to integrate both computationally and theoretically, and then to test it with experiments, that I basically said, well, I want to use math and physics and computer modeling to try to better describe biological systems. And I didn't ever think I was going to work with muscle, but the University of Washington has a pretty good group of computational science and bioengineering people, and they work in a lot of different scales. So I initially went to grad school to work with this person that does like whole organ systems to try to look at like how the heart and the lungs and the blood circulatory system, like how all that works together to change metabolic processes related to obesity and diabetes. But that person like left the first semester that I was there, so I wasn't able to work with him because he went to a different university. And then I started a rotation with this other person. I really, really liked what I was doing there. I was doing molecular dynamics. Do you guys know what molecular dynamics is? Do you know what proteins are? So if you think of like a computer model of a protein and representing all the atomic bonds that are making up that molecule with Newtonian mechanics, such as, you know, like electromagnetism and like forces of bond angles and like a bunch of low-level thermodynamics to describe how that protein might move depending on different like thermal forcing functions and stuff. You basically, it's like computer modeling of like how proteins bind ligands is what I was working on. I was working with this protein called FIMH, which is on the outside of E. coli, and it's what allows bacteria to bind to mannose, which is a sugar molecule that binds to your gut. So it's basically how like E. coli stays in your intestinal tract by binding this sugar molecule that gets taken into your bloodstream through the small intestine. But we were looking at like the thermodynamics of how that FIMH, the end of the protein on the bacteria, binds different levels of mannose or other types of sugars, because it binds mannose the best and other sugars it doesn't bind as well. And anyway, that was like pretty small scale, like biophysics related to how proteins bind. But then that lady went to Europe, and I was really bummed because I really liked that project. And the thing that really was interesting is the woman that I was dating at the time, we moved from Utah up to Seattle, and we'd been there for about 9 months or so. She's now my wife, but like this was 20 years ago, and we'd only been dating for like 3 years or something. And for her to go to Europe, like the lady offered me to go to Europe, and I was like, well, this will be cool. But then for my wife to be able to go to Europe, she couldn't go to Europe without a visa because she wouldn't like, be able to work and all that. But you guys, a lot of you might know about visa problems. There's a lot of visa problems that are especially rampant in the sciences in the last like 4 or 5 years, especially under the new administration with what they've been doing and changing all the J1s. But we can talk about that differently. Anyway, we thought it was probably a bad idea to get married just so she could get a visa so I could go work over in Europe. So then I didn't do that. We ended up getting married like 3 years after that. But I found a different lab that was doing computer modeling related to muscle contraction. And that's sort of just like, some of these things just fall into your lap, and some of these things work out, and some of them don't work out. And I used to overanalyze it a lot and think I had control over it, but I don't know if you really do. You can try your best to put your best foot forward to do what you want to do and hope things work out. But a lot of stuff happens along the way that you have control over and you don't have control over. So if you can be like broad and foundationally oriented and prepared to be flexible and somehow learn to be comfortable with uncertainty, you'll navigate it just fine. I'm not very comfortable with uncertainty, so I've got a lot of like issues that I'm still working through in life. Because you write grants, you write papers, you do all this stuff. Sometimes you're in charge and sometimes you're not, because it's just the way the cookie crumbles. So that's how I switched from sort of like physics into muscle. It was just like happen chance. So I still like to use math to describe systems, but I do it in like different levels of different things related to muscle. Yeah.
I'm interested in, I guess, your suggestions for anybody who's interested in or working abroad, how fun that visa process is.
Well, it's really different depending on country to country to country. In Europe, so all university programs are different. There's a lot that's going on in the Middle East and in China and Southeast Asia, that they're really developing their university programs really, really well. But a lot of the way that they're doing it is they're trying to have people who are mostly trained in Europe and the United States to go and start up their universities there, and they're throwing like tons and tons of money at them to pull them away. And that's good for some people. Traditionally, like, the best universities have always clearly been in the United States and in Europe. But that's starting to change. And the structures are very different depending on where your university is. They're pretty consistent in the United States, but they're different. Like the UK, for example, like all the PhDs are done very, very quickly and they don't do much coursework. And so then a lot of people spend a long time doing like a bunch of post-PhD training before they get faculty positions, or they go into different industry jobs, and that's really good. Like one of the things that we should come back and cycle back to is most people who have a PhD, or most people who go to grad school, only like 10% of them actually work in academics. So most people go do other things, whether they're working for the government, or whether they're working in science policy, or whether they're working in industry positions or different engineering groups, or sometimes they start their own companies, or they can be consultants, or most people with a PhD don't work at a university. And that's sort of a misconception that most people don't know. But it's important that you guys know, depending on thinking about what you want to do in the future. Just because the way probabilities have it, there's very, very few university jobs compared to the rest of the jobs out there in the world. But the best way to learn how to go to grad school is to figure out something that you're interested in and find out where there's good programs that are studying that. And if that's at universities over in Europe, or universities in China, or wherever you might want to live, then you need to contact that program and figure out how that goes with foreign students, because we have a lot easier time using federal money and state money to support people who have US citizenship. And this is the same way that goes for almost every other country in the world, is a lot of what goes on to support students within a particular nation is related to the tax dollars that come from that nation. So it's harder for foreign students to go to school. It doesn't mean it's like not surmountable. It's just that there's a lot more effort you need to put into figuring out how it is, because the opportunities are just simply less. And that's all based on money. So I know that's not like a real satisfying answer. I've never done it my own self. I've got a lot of friends who have, and some of the easiest ways to get it started is to like apply for different types of fellowships and things like that. Like there's Fulbright fellowships, and there's other types of fellowships that are between like our National Science Foundation and the equivalent in Europe that like have these reciprocity programs, and you can apply for them. There's also different labs and different types of like EU scholarships for visiting scientists that sometimes can work for grad students, but they can also work for like postdocs and people who are faculty do exchange, like do faculty exchanges and stuff. And It's just sort of learning about where the money comes from and what opportunities are out there. Like, the simple answer is you can just start to Google it and stuff, but it's not that easy actually, and there's not like a real good consolidation for funding. One of the best is Cal Berkeley. On their website, they've got like a really good database of like different types of scholarships, like worldwide. And I'm sure if you were to like Google something like University of California Berkeley Fellowships database or something, it's probably the best that exists. Yeah.
So, how different can, or maybe should, your graduate studies be from your undergraduate studies?
They can be the same, or they can be completely different. I mean, I don't know if there's a should involved.
Is it better to branch out, or just personal preference?
I mean, it depends what you want to do. If you want to be a computer science person, it's probably not better to branch out. If you wanted to do stuff that's a cross between like computer science and like genomics and like big data stuff, then it's probably better to like branch out to where that would be an appropriate type of lab or degree where you'd learn both things. So going to undergrad is like the foundation. It's like where you start to learn how to learn. But going to grad school is a very important time to be thoughtful about where you want to go and who you want to work with, because that's going to change a lot of probably the skill set you get. That's going to impact your future career path. And then if you decide to go on to do a postdoc and things like that, then it even starts to get more and more specified. So like the further up the like specification tree you get, the harder and harder it is to diversify. So it just depends what you want to do and what you're interested in. So I mean, I've done some pretty different things, and I do a lot of different things compared to a lot of my colleagues. Sometimes that's really good, and I'm interested in a lot of different stuff, and in general I do like biophysics and biomechanics. Like we've done modeling of like how viruses and viral pathways affect cell division and virulence. We've done studies looking at like how mutations in fruit flies differ from mutations in human muscle, because like the structures of the muscles are different, so the proteins behave differently even though it's the same mutation. We've done studies where we've looked at just like mechanical responses given different stiffnesses of different muscles. We've done stuff where we've done work with skin, looking at like mechanical properties of skin. We've done stuff where we've done the same thing with like tendon, as well as like the dura mater of the brain, the outside layer of the brain, related to traumatic brain injury, because you get all this like scarring with traumatic brain injury. But all of that is basically just like biophysics and biomechanics applied to a different tissue. But a lot of people aren't interested in different tissues. I'm just sort of broadly interested. So it depends, because people who are the world's best at whatever they do are usually pretty focused. But that might not be what you want to do, so you need to do what you want to do. Maybe that's not a satisfying answer, but like, if you look broadly, there's probably a good opportunity out there for exactly what you want to do. And there's a lot of labs studying a lot of different things. There's a lot of really good research programs out there. And if you're interested in going to medical school, there's a lot of really neat programs where you can take breaks from medical school to do research. And if you're interested in being sort of a clinician scientist, you could consider doing an MD, PhD. And then usually when you do an MD, PhD, you don't have to pay for medical school or grad school. So, I mean, you're there for a while because you combine like 2 4-year programs. But then you have an MD, PhD, and typically you don't have debt when you finish, which is a real big thing based on like how you can navigate the rest of your life based on debt loads. I know that you guys have a whole different thing that you face in your generation. When I don't mean, like, I'm only 40, I just barely turned 40. But I think about how things are so different from when I was, you know, I started college when everybody's like 18 when they start. My first quarter of college at University of Utah is a relatively affordable school, and I had in-state tuition. It was like $800 a quarter. And I know that like nowadays, it's like $8,000 a semester at University of Utah for in-state tuition. So that's like, it's hard to switch between quarters and semesters, but that's like a huge increase in what stuff costs. And I know that you guys are facing that all the time, where even though it's different, I mean, I don't think it's very sustainable. Have you guys ever watched like the Ivory Tower and things like that about how the structure of education is not probably going to stay the way it is just because it's unsustainable economically? So there's a lot of people working on this, but that doesn't make it any easier for you. You guys are going to school right now, and it costs a lot. And if you do well, it's probably worth it. But if you like, and I hope you're all doing well and you're all here doing the right stuff for summer and learning cool stuff. I'd like, if you have friends who went for a year or two and like flunk out and have $20,000 of debt and no degree to show for it, that's like a really shitty situation to be in. So I empathize with students like that because it's a difficult situation. So on a lighter note, has anybody done anything fun, like ridden the bikes or gone to any of the restaurants around here or gone to Moscow's farmer's market or gone to the gym or anything like that? It's a pretty decent gym. Are you keeping busy? I hope you're not in the lab all the time. The student in my lab didn't want to come today because she wanted to do whatever she's doing. She's just analyzing data. She totally could have come. And she's like, no, I'm just going to analyze my data, so whatever. Everybody can make their own choices. Yeah.
Sorry to bring it back to academics.
It's okay. No, we can do that.
And maybe based off what you were telling us, you might not be the best person for this question, but if you wanted to transfer your degree from engineering or like physics into a biomedical based field, what kind of steps would you actively take to get that happen?
Well, like as a grad student or an undergrad student?
Either once you get your undergrad, going into either grad school or industry, and maybe you have a preference on that, which would be more beneficial for you.
So you said, what's your current degree?
Mechanical material engineering.
So you just need to like learn some biology along the way. There's a few books you could read, or you could just get a job. I mean, I'm a terrible person to ask because I literally have had like 3 life sciences classes in my entire life. I had in grad school a cell biology class, like a cardiovascular systems physiology class. Oh, in my senior year of college, because I was interested in maybe going into bioengineering, I took a biology 101 class. And so I don't actually know very much biology that has been formally trained, but I've like read a lot. Like that's the real way you learn, is to study stuff and to read it. And a lot of the other fallacy, I think, everybody thinks you're like so prepared to do something when you graduate. When you get a job, you'll learn everything you need for your job when you get your job. And you just learn constantly. Because you don't actually know anything when you graduate. You sort of like know how you should maybe be responsible. Maybe you should show up to class on time. Maybe you should study. Hopefully you can accrue whatever points you need to get that little grade at the end of the semester. There's like little check boxes of accountability, but you don't actually really know anything until you start to use it. So I took a break for like 2 years before I went back to grad school because I was so done with school when I finished. But then I didn't really like being told what to do all the time. And I didn't like the lack of flexibility of what I was supposed to be working on or thinking about or how I was doing that. Like it was pretty structured. I was working for this company that makes a whole bunch of biological measurement equipment, like related to like nowadays, and you guys know what global warming is and like climate change and carbon dioxide and methane fluxes and things like that that are in the atmosphere. I was designing a bunch of equipment that like 20 or 25 years ago, that was like right at the front end of even trying to measure the greenhouse gases over different types of ecosystems, you know, in cities versus forests versus, well, crops, different types of crops. Like, because corn is a huge methane emitter. So there's a lot of work we were doing in corn crops to try to measure how methane changed depending on how the different types of crops were growing. So anyway, I mean, that was my first job, was designing equipment related to carbon dioxide gas exchange. And then I totally changed. So I mean, I think you just do what you're interested in, but you need to learn how to do your stuff along the way. Like if maybe you're interested in changing or diversifying, you could take like some introductory bioengineering or biophysics classes like your last year, or take a couple classes after you graduate, or you don't have to. Nowadays there's everything on like the Khan Academy. You can basically like learn for free. You don't have to like have a grade, you just have to be able to like know your stuff. But the problem is that I then faced in grad school is there's all these like check boxes you're supposed to have for prerequisites. And I like had hardly any of the prerequisites, so I had to take like tons of extra courses of like checking off the prerequisites because, so I mean, I basically took all those extra things in grad school, which kind of sucked because I like had to take like a third more classes than all my peers. But I don't know, I mean, you just gotta make it work. You're welcome. Yeah.
So I was kind of wondering about, you said you took a gap between undergrad and going to grad school. Do you like, is that recommended, or like how hard is it to get into grad school after taking a break versus just going straight from undergrad?
So don't go to graduate school unless you know why you're going to graduate school. A ton of people think like, oh, I'm graduating, I'll go to more school because I don't know what to do with my life. And that is like the absolute worst reason to go to graduate school, because then you get into it for like 2 years and you're like pissed off about why you're there, and it's a lot harder than you thought it was, because grad school, like, here's the step from going to like high school to college, right? This is the step from like college to like grad school. It's like a 10-fold harder. And people care about you 100 times less. I don't care if you read the book or not read the book, just you either pass the test or you don't pass the test. It's not my responsibility to educate you. It's not my responsibility to make your project work. I mean, as a mentor, I'm engaged with my students and stuff, but like, it's your degree, it's not my degree. I've got a ton of other shit that I need to worry about. That's not how it is for undergrads. I mean, undergrads, you like give all these little steps of stuff, like these are your due dates, this is what you need to keep on top of. We've got these check marks along the way for your final project. Like, that's not how it is in the real world, and that's not how it is in grad school. So, whether you take a gap or not take a gap, I don't think matters at all. If you're gonna take a gap, it's probably easier to write your letters or your interests of engagement of why you want to go to grad school if you were to take a gap to do something that is leading you towards what you want to do. If you want to if you take a gap for 2 years to be a deep sea fisher person in Tonga, people might think that you were just like, maybe you're recovering your batteries and you need to go back in, but it might be easier to admit somebody who like said, oh, I've been working at this company learning these things for the last year versus I've been traveling around the globe. But you should probably take time to travel around the globe if you're going to do it after college, because you're never going to do it later. Like, the easiest time to do anything is now. Because things, believe it or not, just get more complicated every year of your life. Unless you just like travel around the globe. And then people know how to do that. Like, somehow they make that work. I don't know. But I don't think it matters one way or the other. So you should do what works for you. And if it takes time to figure out what you want to do, if it takes time to figure out what programs you want to go to, it's better to take the time to be prepared to know why you're doing it than to just like go into something because you're going to go into it. Because you don't know what else is better to do. But I've got some really good friends that like dropped out of grad school along the way. And they're all doing fine and doing different stuff, but like, that was a really tough few years because like, you're fighting with your like values of what you want to do or not want to do, or whether you want to go to the lab or not go to the lab, and then you feel like a loser because you like dropped out and you didn't want to be there in the first place. I'm like, it's better to know why you want to do it than to just do it because it's really hard.
How do you feel about post-bac programs?
So you might have to describe to me or define to me what you're meaning specifically about the post-bac program.
So I looked into what's specifically so the NIH IRTA program, IRTA, and basically you spend
It's like a 2-year program.
if you're awarded with it, I think you spend at least a year, possibly more, depending on the nature of your project. Basically just dedicated to a research project. I don't really know much more beyond that.
Well, that program in particular is amazing. That's like about the best for what you're talking about in the country. So the NIH program is if you want to do biomedical research. Back in Bethesda, where National Institutes of Health are, I don't know how many they give out every year. And I don't know if they're a 1-year or a 2-year program. But basically, after you graduate, or before you graduate, ideally, so you could start in the summer or whatever, depending on what breaks you want to take, you apply to either work with a particular investigator at National Institutes of Health or some type of project. And you go and you basically do research in their lab for a year or 2. And then you learn if you like research, you learn if you like that particular direction. So a student was in my lab a couple of years ago because he did that for 2 years, and he was studying something to do with rod and cone response in the retina, and they were using goldfish, but like it was related to vision. And he was doing a bunch of microscopy and electrophysiology related to vision. And then he actually came here to do a vet degree. but in the summers, he worked in my lab for 3 summers. So he learned a lot about doing research, and that is a really good program. And then it was pretty easy to have him in the lab because he knew a lot of lab skills. And so then, even though summers are sort of short, as you guys can tell, you're probably not really getting a lot done. You might be, but probably not. It's really hard to do projects in like 6 to 8 weeks, but it's really important to at least like learn about the process. So I learn about the process, but don't put your expectations so high if you don't have like an absolutely bomber outcome in your poster come like 3 weeks from now. So it's okay, because science is hard and you're all trying to do stuff that nobody else has done before. Because if we already knew how it works, we wouldn't be trying to ask how it works. So, but that's a good program.
Could that be like, would it be accurate to describe programs that like that as kind of like miniature grad school?
Maybe. Kind of not, because you don't have to balance as much stuff. It's more like a low-paying job. That's what I was gonna say. Like, I don't know how much you get paid, but I don't think you get paid like, what, you probably get paid like $40,000 a year or something?
Yeah, I don't think it's a whole lot.
Which, I mean, that's not bad, but that's not amazing. If you were to probably go into some like biotech industry job, I don't know what you'd start at, but it's different though. I mean, you're getting research training. Another setup that's really good with that is Genentech. Genentech has a lot of post-bac programs and also postdoc programs. And then a lot of people who work in that get an understanding about how industry works and how research in industry works. And all of my friends, so I would like plus or minus a year of graduation from us, there were maybe like 30 or 40 of us that graduated that I'm like pretty good friends with. There's like 3 or 4 of us that went into academia, and most everybody else went into some sort of biotech thing. A few people did some government work and does work for like NSF and NIH and stuff, but they all make like 2 or 3 or 4 times what I make. So like, we're paid pretty well here, and like my salary's like around $100,000, but they're all making like at least $250,000, if not $400,000, and they never did a postdoc. Like, they're just like so far up the pay scale from where I'll ever get to. So it's a very big difference depending on industry and academia. So, I don't know. A lot of them like have worked at a bunch of like, a couple of them went to McKinsey Consulting and they lived like all over the world. Like, a few of them have worked for other big companies, and they basically choose where they want to live. Like, a few of them live in Korea, a few of them live in Japan, quite a few of them live in other places in the United States or Europe or Canada. I don't know any of them that are down in South America or Africa, but there's a lot of opportunities out there.
What stops you from, I don't know, I feel like upon knowing that, I'll just like try to drop everything and dive immediately into biotech or something like that. Like, what's, why?
Why haven't I? Well, because I'm not very excited about being told what to do in a day. And I don't have the background and training to like start as a head of something. that's all people who have been in the industry for 10 years. So I mean, where you sort of make that choice is if you're gonna do a postdoc or not. For me, it would have been that's just sort of a different path. I mean, I guess I could, but I'm not very interested in that.
That makes sense. I mean, I don't know anything about working in the industry, what that's like.
I mean, I don't really either. I worked a little bit for some different company, and after about like a year, I was like, I don't think I like this. So then I went back to grad school. But everybody gets to make their own choices. Sometimes they're even good ones. Who else has any other questions? Good talk. All right, if you guys don't have any other questions, I hope you can enjoy your day. There's a good chance if you go over to the Cub, they're gonna have the soccer game on. You can watch the second half. Does anybody know what the score is? Seriously?
What's
Don't know what the score is?
what's the game? Who's playing who?
It's Norway and who? Norway
England,
and
2-0.
Who?
England's winning 2-0, right?
England, Norway and England, 2-0, England. So, they probably will have the game on. Okay, cheers guys, let me know if you have any questions.
All right, thank you.